Hello, my name is Advita Patel. I'm an internal communications and culture specialist. I'm based up in the north of England in the beautiful city of Manchester, and I run my own consultancy called Comms Rebel. If it's obvious, the sign behind me gives it away. And at Comms Rebel, we help organizations build confident workplaces through effective, inclusive internal communications so people can be their best selves. If you were watching our live webinar with Oak Engage, you would have seen that I had a few minor technical issues with the Wi-Fi, which just wasn't a pleasant experience for those watching. So what we've decided to do is pre-record the questions that you asked me and also address some of the myths that were asked by the wonderful Eva, who was the host from Oak Engage. I want to be able to do this without any interruptions and me popping in and out, which is why they are pre-recorded. However, the challenge with pre-record is that we can't have a two-way conversation. So if you do have any thoughts, any ideas, then please do get in touch with the fab folks at Oak and they will make sure that the questions get back to me. Or if you want to message me directly through LinkedIn, you are more than welcome to do that. You can find me under Advita Patel. So let's have a conversation on there as well, because normally we'd have a chat through the chat channel, or you might be popping up on screen and having a conversation. So without further ado, let's address the first myth. The first myth was leaders are the problem in the workplace when it comes to effective communication. I am going to disagree. Leaders are not the problem at all. In fact, leaders don't know what they don't know. Our role as internal communication professionals or employee experience professionals is to influence and demonstrate our impact. Now, I'm going to generalize here a little bit because I know it's not everybody, but generally in our profession, and I've worked in this profession for over, 20 years, and it's the same conversation that comes up time and time again that leaders are the blockers. We're not being invited into conversations. We're not able to demonstrate our impact and influence. Partly it is the fault of the organization sometimes because they don't see our value. But I would say that we are shockingly bad at sharing and demonstrating our value in terms of outcomes and what good looks like for the organization and how we are contributing to the objectives. So when leaders just see us as a tactical function, not contributing to their strategic vision and objectives, of course, they're just going to tell us to do the odd newsletter or write blogs or whatever. We need to be much better at advocating for ourselves. There's various reasons why we are not good at it, mainly because we are being expected to do more with less always. So we're always back to back and have a list as long as our arm, so we can't think strategically. We're also, I would say, many of us are people pleasers. And the reason we're people pleasers is because we are constantly fighting for our worth and value. So we believe the more we produce and the more we do, the more we're going to be respected and the more we're going to be seen as a must-have rather than nice to have. And then that causes the blockers between being invited to those big, important decision-making meetings and then just being told afterwards in what they want us to write and deliver. So leaders are not the problem. We are the problem here because we don't stand behind our own conviction, because we have been conditioned over the years to just add tactical value rather than strategic value, and that needs to shift and change. And what I would say is that if you have truly tried to demonstrate impact and influence, and if you have pushed back and you have put boundaries in place and you have talked about consequences and you have demonstrated what value you will bring if you were to do X, Y, and Z, and you're still not getting that headspace or you're still not getting that support, then I would ask you to reconsider whether your gift of internal comms and your expertise is worthy or valued in the organization. And I would highly advocate for you to start planning your exit strategy. So that's myth one. Myth two, we just need a seat at the table. I have literally just written an article about this because it just isn't going away. And I know lots of people are very tired of talking about this. And there's many experienced internal comms folks who are just saying, stop whining, stop whinging. You don't need a seat at the table to influence. Now, I am going to slightly disagree with that stand. I don't think you need a permanent seat at the table to influence and have an impact. But what I do think you need is an open invitation to be able to contribute. If that door is firmly locked and bolted and there's absolutely no way you're getting around that table, or they don't feel that you will add any value around that table, then there's a problem. There is a table that exists in organizations, and the privileged few have access to it. And we need to be able to either take our own chair to this table or be able to impact and influence enough so we're invited as and when needed. Do I think we need a permanent chair around that table? No. Do I think we should have a chair at that table? Yes. Decisions are being made around that table. When we are not invited to that table, or we're not seen as contributors to those decisions, then again, as I said in the first myth, we're just seen as a tactical function that can be dismissed as and when budgets are down. So I want you to really think about what influence, again, we're going back to that influence, and what impact are we talking about? It's no point in telling anyone to stop whining about that table and stop asking for that seat, because decisions are being made around that table. What we do need to be talking about, because it is a different type of conversation, is what do we need to do as a function to demonstrate impact and demonstrate influence? And we also need to be able to show how we are contributing to the success of that organization. And if we can't demonstrate that, and we're not talking the language of business, and we're talking the language of comms, then getting a seat around that table, or being invited around that table, or being able to influence in the right way is going to be very difficult. We do need to speak the language of the business. What is the most important thing to the business leaders in that organization? I will always say to communication professionals that we are business leaders with communications expertise. That is the way I reframe it, because it helps us shift our mindset and we start talking much more about behaviors and outcomes and demonstrating how we're impacting the bottom line. I have been in many debates with lots of comms folks who say to me that we can't demonstrate that type of value. I am going to push back and say, yes, we can. We just have to be much more influential and demonstrate the line between the contributions we're making and how it influences some of the targets and objectives that the organization have set themselves. Do not ever shy away. I want you to take up the space, and I want you to hold your head up high, and I want you to say, due to this campaign, due to this work, due to this support, due to the advice, due to the coaching, due to the counseling, whatever you want to call it, this is what we have contributed to the business to make sure that people can be their best selves, so they can deliver against the objectives that have been set with them. And this is how communications have contributed. That will get you the seat around that table. It's not about just having that seat. It's what you are going to do with it that is really important. The third myth is that everybody reads the newsletter. I'm sorry to break this to you, but they don't. I have done hundreds of internal comms reviews and focus groups and one-to-one conversations. I can count on one hand how many people said to me that they look forward to the weekly corporate newsletter and they can't wait to open it and read it. Hardly anyone reads the corporate newsletter unless they are mentioned in the newsletter, unless there's something in it for them, or someone has said, if you want some staff benefit, is in the newsletter. Otherwise, I'm really sorry to break this to you, they are not reading it. Now, I'm not saying that newsletters are obsolete and we shouldn't be using them. Newsletters are very powerful if they are personalized to the individual. They work well then. Just think about the external newsletters we receive from retailers and from other services that we access in our own personal lives, and how personalized they are to us. You know, if I'm shopping at a certain retail store, they will email me telling me what outfits I should go and buy, or if they know what kind of groceries I bought, they'll give me the special offer on those groceries. And it makes it feel very personalized. From an internal comms perspective, we haven't really moved very far with the personalization. We're quite generic and we're quite broad brush with what we believe colleagues need to know. If we can break that down into personas, we can make newsletters more personable to people. We can address the concerns that they have got rather than put in concerns of everybody in the newsletter, then I guarantee that people will read it. But nobody nowadays is sitting there reading a newsletter from start to end at all. We are competing with so many distractions, with so many more interesting things that our colleagues can read in their spare time, interesting to them, that unfortunately you sit in there for 2 days a week pulling together a corporate newsletter that's quite broad is not going to support some of the work that you want people to understand that you are contributing to. I think there are better ways to communicate information. I think there are better ways of personalizing information. And if you are just sending out one newsletter to the entire colleague population, then you are probably only having a handful of people who are interested in what you have to say. Okay, those are the myths that have been addressed. If you've got any thoughts in anything that I have shared or you disagree, I love a debate. So please do let me know if you disagree with anything I've said or if you think it's not accurate. We are now going to move on to some questions that were asked. So the first question that was asked was, what do internal comms people need to stop doing? Great question. I'm going to address this in two parts. The first part from a personal perspective and what I was saying in terms of personal development, we need to stop people pleasing. This is coming from a former people pleaser. I now call myself a recovering people pleaser. And I know why we do this. We do this because we want to demonstrate our value and we want people to like us. So if they like us, they'll invite us to a conversation and they'll, give us a validation and they'll give us a permission. But people pleasing has dropped us into so much hot water and so much more additional things that should not be part of our remit. The challenge we have in our industry is that sometimes people think we should do anything and everything that nobody else wants to do, and it kind of gets thrown our way. So we need to be better at putting in boundaries, and we need to stop saying yes to everything. Now, there are ways of saying no without just saying no. If you're uncomfortable with just saying a firm no, if you're trying to build a relationship, there are different ways to say no. You can say not yet. You can say, I've got these 3 priorities. Which of these priorities would you like me to stop doing so I can focus on the priority that you're sharing with me? You can say, what are the consequences of not doing this? What are the measures that you're looking for? There are different ways to do this, but one of the things that we need to stop doing is definitely people pleasing. The other thing we need to stop doing is pretending that we can do everything with no resource. It is impossible to do the amount of work that some of you will be doing with the resource that you have. We need to get better at advocating for our resources. We need to get better at developing business cases and demonstrating what value and return on investment we will be making if they were to invest in our function. We are just not very good at advocating for ourselves. And I said this right at the start of this conversation. We need to stop waiting for permission. We need to stop waiting for validation, and we need to start advocating for ourselves, because if we don't advocate for ourselves and we don't make sure that we are out there sharing our wins and successes, then no one else is going to do that for us. And many of you will probably be solo internal comms people or have very small teams, and we're often making sure that everyone else's successes are being shared, but we are not very good at sharing our own successes. So we need to stop waiting for people to give us permission. We need to start bringing our own shares into conversations where decisions are being made. And we need to stop doing everything for everyone and burning ourselves out. Question 2. Is internal comms a strategic function or is it a tactical function, and whose fault is the confusion? Is it the practitioners who are too busy delivering the outputs, or is it the leaders who keep hiring us to make newsletters? This is a great question. I will say that the fault lies with both camps. It lies with the leaders and it lies with the internal comms teams. I know that's a bit of a cop-out, but bear with me, and this is why I'm saying this. From a leader's perspective, they just want to get stuff done, right? So they will just be like, can you do this? Can you do this? Can you do this? They just want to tick it off their list and then they can say, fine. Some of it is very tokenistic and not very thought through. And that's where we need to kind of come in and ask those kind of curious questions of the leaders and say, what outcomes are you expecting to see from this message? Or what behavior change are you expecting to see? Or what are the consequences of us not doing this in the way that you want us to do it? And what are the successes that you are looking for? We need to be a little bit more curious about some of the tactics that leaders try to push onto us so they can get it off their list and the things that they believe are important. We, as I've said before, is that we are people pleasers, and we are not very good at putting boundaries in place, and we're not very good at pushing back, and we're not great at difficult conversations. We also want to be able to demonstrate our value, because the nervousness of something like AI taking our jobs is real. I have spoken to many internal comms pros out there who are very worried and very scared that their job will not exist in the next 5 to 10 years. Now, our job is going to adjust and adapt. What AI cannot replace is how we build connection. What AI cannot replace is mass emotions. What AI can't tell you is whether your chief executive or your exec directors are having a bad day. What it can't tell you is how your colleagues are feeling in the moment of a restructure or how a change is going to be perceived. It can give you generic advice. It can give you maybe some even tailored advice if you put the right prompts in, but it's never going to be able to articulate human emotion from a mass perspective. It can do it from an individual level, but not from a mass perspective. That's where we come in. We can read signs. We observe really well. We're very good at seeing what leaders want and what colleagues need and bringing them together. That's where we need to kind of make sure we have that strategic vision. It's ridiculous to say that we will only ever do strategic stuff. Many of us are working in very small teams, so we're going to have to do both, but there's a balance. And we need to be better at the balance. We always have our head down often, and we've got, as I said before, a list as long as our arm. We're constantly just churning stuff out, and we're not really considering the impact that stuff is having on the business, on the colleagues or the leaders we're trying to influence and demonstrate impact to. We need to be able to just slow down a little bit, reflect, review, observe, and then show what is working and what isn't working. And we also need to have an eye on the outside. We can be quite tunnel visioned as internal comms people, and we're looking very much internally, and which would have been fine 20 years ago, but things have shifted a lot, and we need to have one eye on the outside, and we need to be able to make sure we are looking long term and being able to predict what is happening, that we can then advise and guide our leaders when it comes to communicating with our colleagues. We have the power, in my opinion, to influence and demonstrate impact and to show leaders that we are there to do more than just do the tactical things that they may believe we have been employed for. The next question is, change and comms often do the same job from different desks. Why has the profession not consolidated, and who is protecting that turf? Now, what I do want to say is that change management and change communications are very two different jobs. And I have seen many change comms people get confused with change management. We should be able to support and guide change managers. We are change communications support and specialist, if that is your bag, if that's what you want to do. If you want to be a change manager, that's a completely different profession. And I see many folks mixing the two up. Change managers are not communication professionals, and communication professionals are not necessarily change managers. We can, of course, go ahead and do change comms courses or change management courses. And if you want to shift over to change management, that's absolutely okay. But we shouldn't mix the two. Change management has a very different set of skills than what a change comms person would do. Our job is to make sure whatever change is taking place from a change management perspective, we're contributing and demonstrating our impact when it comes to communicating that change. You may want to understand some project terminology. You may want to understand some methodologies and some frameworks. That is absolutely okay. But we cannot confuse change management and communication, because that is, again, we're taking on more burden on our shoulders, and it's depleting the role that we are there to do. We need to be careful that we are doing change comms, not change management. So there is obviously overlap in some parts, but we should put those, again, boundaries in place and talk about how our job as change comms specialist can support change managers. A bit of a long-winded answer there for that one, but I just want to really hone in on that and don't inadvertently become the change expert in the organization and have that additional responsibility on your shoulders. They need specialist people to do change management, and change comms is an add-on to that work and should be working in collaboration, not replacing one or the other. Next question is, what advice would you give to someone who has a largely external comms background but wants to move more into internal comms? What I will say is that external and internal comms have interchangeable skills. What used to be purely internal comms now doesn't really exist, and vice versa with external comms. Katie McCauley, who's been doing this work for a long time, said about 10, 15 years ago, actually, that internal and external is now going to be one. And I can see patterns of that happening in various different organizations. If you are a largely external comms expert who wants to move into internal comms, then my advice to you would be to try and get some work experience on projects that involve internal comms. So if you work for an agency, ask the agency leaders if you can be part of any pitches that are going in to do internal comms. If you work in an organization, then try and work shadow internal comms teams or try to get involved in some projects that involve internal comms. The other thing that works really well, and a few friends that I know have done this very successfully, is that they've done job swaps with external comms. So as internal comms folks often say to me that I would love to get some external comms experience. So what's ended up happening, and I've advised a few people to do this, is to do a job swap in departments. So if you've got an external comms function and an internal comms function, it's worth doing a 3-month job swap and seeing how that could work, because you're still kind of mentoring each other, but you're doing different jobs and you're learning from each other's skill set as well. Work experience is another good way of doing it. So if you've got some additional annual leave or some extra time, then it's always worth dropping a note to various different organizations to see if you can do some work experience for a week, or work or support or be seconded to do projects and stuff. So there's various different ways that you can do that. In terms of things you can do while you're doing your day job, you can also follow some experts on internal comms. There's loads of folks out there. I'm sure Oak Engage have got a list of people that you can follow as well, and I can share a list of internal comms experts and specialists. You can read books and blogs as well. There's loads of books and blogs out there around internal comms. Jenny Field, Rachel Miller, Regine Nelson. Of course, I talk about internal comms all the time. There's various newsletters that you can sign up to as well. So have a think about where your gaps are in your knowledge as well, because every expert and specialist talks about something a little bit different. Hopefully that helps if anyone is interested in moving into internal comms. I am obviously biased. I think it's one of the best communication disciplines out there. But I do also believe that over time, over the next 5, maybe 10 years, the internal and external comms roles will merge. Next question. If you were starting out today, what skills would you build? What would you prioritize, and where would you look for mentorship? Oh, I love this question. I would build skills in business acumen. I wish I did this sooner. So when I did get that seat around that table that everybody talks about, I remember being very excited about getting this, the seat around this decision-making table. There's lots of more senior leaders than me, but I felt like a peer. So I went along to that first meeting. I sat around that table and I was mute. I did not say a word in the entire board meeting because I had no idea what they were talking about. The terminologies, the acronyms, it was a very financial, commercial heavy organization that I was supporting. And all the conversation was around financials and commercial targets. And I was just absolutely lost. I had no clue how I could even contribute. And this is what I meant when I said it earlier about when you do get that seat around the table, what are you doing with it? Because I pushed and pushed my MD to give me the seat. And eventually he gave in and said, yes, absolutely, come along. In that first meeting, I didn't say anything. And I realized, oh my goodness, like, what am I actually contributing this? I am way out my depth here. And that's me doing a vulnerable share. And I remember my HR director speaking to me after that meeting and asking if I was okay because I was so quiet. And I said to her that I was a bit lost because I feel like I've joined the story like at chapter 10. I have no idea what's happening. And she was like, oh, you'll get used to it. It's absolutely fine. But I really wanted to be a bit more proactive. So after the second board meeting, when I barely contributed and I was at risk of actually getting, being asked to take the minutes, I went off and did a finance for non-finance manager course. It was a 3-day course. I'm not going to lie, it was quite intense, but it was so powerful. And I learned everything I needed to learn about budget sheets. I learned what the acronyms stood for, like EBITDA, and what was net cash and what was profit and loss, and all of that stuff that I kind of knew because I was already kind of managing a budget, but not in detail. And then I asked my finance business partner, who is allocated to our department, if she would be my mentor. And she said, yes, absolutely, if I will help her be more confident in her communication skills. So we did a skills exchange. And oh my goodness, it completely transformed how I contributed in that meeting. Understanding the business a bit better meant that when I went into conversations and spoke about communications, I could speak the language of the business. I could relate much more to what the business leaders cared about. And in this organization, it was very much about revenue and risk and making sure that we're not losing money unintentionally. And I could relate some of the comms campaigns and some of the comms work we were doing to those big ticket items that they really cared about. And that would not have happened if I hadn't invested in something like finance for non-finance managers. I also started to listen to more business leaders. So business leader podcast, business leader books. I wanted to really understand the world of business a bit better. Again, I want to be a business leader with communications expertise, not a communications leader with business specialism. If you're completely starting out fresh, then I would say you need to learn how to build relationships with various different audiences. I would say that you need to understand what good communication looks like. And I don't mean what other people tell you what it looks like, but you need to understand what it looks like for your organization. So this involves listening, active listening to what your people are saying. So make sure you are where your colleagues are. You need to make sure that you are able to justify why that decision has been made. So you need to be able to have those difficult conversations. You need to be able to challenge. You also need to be able to lean into your curiosity and ask questions. And I would also say learn how to take up space. A lot of internal comms folks, especially in their early career, kind of tiptoe into conversations because they're really worried about offending somebody or saying something wrong or not having the seniority they need to be able to contribute, or they believe they don't have the seniority they need. But we have to remember in organizations, we are subject matter experts and we have been employed to share our skill set and make sure that the organization is doing right by the populations and the publics that it's serving, including colleagues and external audiences. So you need to be able to lean into some of those human skills more. Your technical skills you learn as you kind of grow, but the human skills, you need to put a little bit more effort into it. And in terms of mentorship, where would you look for mentorship? The various communication professions have mentoring programs. So I know IOIC, which is based in the UK, has a mentorship program. I was the former president of the Chartered Institute of Public Relations, and they have an informal mentoring program, especially if you're looking to become chartered. IABC, I think, do informal mentoring, PRCA, PRSA, those kind of industry professional bodies, communication bodies often have a mentoring program. If that's not your bag, then never fear asking someone that you admire. The only thing that they can say is no. And that, some people are very busy, and if they say no, they may direct you to someone that can help. Or put out a request on LinkedIn and say you're looking for a mentor. So that's the way I would do it if I was looking for mentorship. I would always try and find a mentor outside of my immediate circle as well. If somebody knows you too well, there's sometimes bias and assumptions about your characteristic. You often want to find a mentor who doesn't know you that well, so they can be objective when they're giving you feedback. In my new book that I recently written called Decoding Confidence, The 7 Habits of Confident Leaders, I talk about a thing called the learning circle. And the learning circle is a bit like the personal board of directors. So organizations have board of directors, as we all know, but we never really think about our own personal board of directors. And I've kind of referenced it as a learning circle. And a learning circle should have 3 key characteristics in there. You should have the believers. So these are the people who will believe in you, who will champion you, who will support you, who will always push you along when you're feeling a bit low, and they'll give you the nourishment that you need. Then you've got the challengers, and these are the folks who will challenge you and hold the mirror up to you. And, they'll tell you whether you are drinking your own Kool-Aid or whether you have made a mistake and you need to rectify it. They're the ones who've got your best interest at heart, but they will be honest and truthful to you. And you need these folks in your circle. But you want someone who does have your best interest at heart and isn't just saying stuff because they want to make you feel bad or they're projecting their own insecurities onto you. And then you've got the bridges, and the bridges are the people who build connections for you. So if you if you know someone who's well connected to different people, then they are your bridge and they can maybe do introductions. The one thing I will say about bridges is that there needs to be a mutual relationship there, but everybody needs a bridge. Everybody needs people in different parts of the industry that can build connections for you. So think about your learning circle as well when it comes to mentorship, because they can be your formal and informal mentors. Next question. Roles increasingly merge internal comms, PR, external, marketing, and exec comms. Is this the trend, and how should comms pros navigate it to land their next role? I kind of addressed it in the previous question. I am seeing this as a trend. Yes, I am seeing comms folks adopting and adapting more responsibilities onto their own kind of remit. So a lot of internal comms folks are now taking responsibility for brand. And in some cases, marketing. I've seen external comms taking responsibility for public affairs and things like that. And external internal comms, as I said before, are looking like they are merging. This is for a myriad of different reasons, right? Partly because budgets are not where they were before and people are trying to consolidate costs. So they're bringing disciplines together. The way the modern workplace is set out is changing as well. Nothing really is kept internal anymore. We've got so much external channels that it's a little bit more challenging, I would say, to keep stuff just purely internal. You do need to be a little bit more external thinking when it comes to internal comms. So the trends are showing that these roles are merging, but we have to be really careful that we're not burdening ourselves with lots of different responsibilities when we don't have the skill set to do it, or we shouldn't be doing it really. We need to be really careful about the boundaries we put in place and how we manage those boundaries as well. Now, if you are seeing your organization bringing and merging these roles together and you can see a gap in your skill set, then of course, you need to go and get some qualifications, do some more mentoring, get a coach, join a professional body where you can learn from other people. But I just want us to be a bit cautious here, because I don't want us to fall into the trap of being everything for everybody but nothing for no one. And that's something that internal comms is at risk at doing, because when, like I said throughout this conversation, that we are generally people pleasers. We do want to be seen. We like to be validated generally. We often wait for permission, and we want to be wanted and needed. And the fear of the world right now with the job market, we just take on these additional responsibilities because we're scared of losing our jobs. And that is a really valid concern. But we do need to make sure that we don't fall into burnout. And we do need to also make sure that we've got the skills required to do those jobs well. If they are going to give you more additional responsibilities for other areas, then make sure they're investing in you. Make sure they're putting you through the right training programs. Make sure they're giving you additional salaries as well, by the way. You should not be doing these additional responsibilities for exactly the same amount of money you're getting paid. That is not what you would do. You'll never see a finance director or a finance lead doing legal. Like, you just wouldn't. So be really careful about what you're saying yes to. Make sure that you are petitioning for yourself and advocating for yourself and getting the right training and support and guidance if you are taking on a new division or a new department. And make sure that you have got those skills to do it well. Otherwise, you're going to struggle with your self-esteem, and your self-esteem will start to spiral, which will have a knock-on effect on your confidence. So be very mindful about that. That's what I would say. It is going to change, and we do need to stay ahead of the trends here a little bit. So if you can preempt that, then great. And if your organization is moving towards that trend, then you need to make sure you're advocating for the spend on you. Next question. What are the best questions to ask in a global survey to measure the impact of internal comms? We could do an entire webinar on this question alone. It is something that I am very passionate about. I feel that we need to be asking better questions in surveys about the impact of internal comms rather than did you read the newsletter? We need to be very mindful of how we're measuring outcomes. And if you can influence a global survey and add some additional questions that demonstrates the impact of internal comms, then that is amazing. There are a number of questions I believe you can ask to demonstrate value for internal comms. So like I said, it could be an entire webinar. So I'm just going to give you a few top tips and actual questions that you could ask. So you want to see whether the colleagues in your organization understand generally what is going on around them. So things like, I understand what our organization is trying to achieve. When things change, I understand the reasons behind the decision. I understand how my role contributes to those goals. That will give you an understanding yourself whether some of the messaging that's been put out there is doing the job it needs to do. If people don't understand why that change is happening, if people don't understand how their role contributes to the goals, if people don't understand what the organization is trying to achieve, then the explanation and the why is not great. And whether that's through you as a communication professional doing the corporate channels or whether it's through the leaders that you're supporting, that needs to be adjusted and adapted and changed. Then you may want to look at like trust and credibility. So question you could ask there is, I trust the information I receive from the organization. That will tell you how people are perceiving messages out there. You could ask, I believe what leaders say matches what they do. So again, that tells you whether it's being seen as relevant, the information that's being sent out there. A lot of organizations that I support will often, when I do focus groups and one-to-ones, will often say to me that my leader says the right words, but the behaviors that they demonstrate don't often reflect the words they are saying. And that will tell you that there is a trust gap there. There's also questions around enablement and action. So I have the information I need to do my job well. That's a good question to ask. That tells you again whether the information that you're sharing and putting out there, either through the corporate comms function and internal comms function or through your leaders, is relevant, or is it just noise? Things like communication helps me make better decisions in my role. That's a good question to ask, but be very clear, like, communications that I read on email, the newsletters that I receive, whatever, like try and see if you can put a channel in there as well. You could also say about listening. So I feel I'm able to share my views and share my ideas. I believe that my feedback is listened to and acted upon. I know how to raise a question or a concern effectively. And then if finding information, I can find information easily. Which channels do you actually rely on is a good question as well. So like I said, it could be an entire webinar on this, by the way, but hopefully that's giving you a little bit of a flavor of what you could ask to understand how internal comms could demonstrate measurable impact. The final question on my list is, the age of AI, how do IC pros, especially those in their early careers, build critical thinking to improve on AI output rather than copy and paste it? Such a good question. This is, according to research and studies, a core skill that is depleting in everybody, not only comms people, but generally everyone. We are not very good at critical thinking anymore, and we're getting worse. So we have to be very, very intentional with how we use AI and what it is doing for us. Taking it at face value is not critical thinking. We need to ask it to challenge our thinking. We need to be able to spot where it's got things wrong. We need to be able to diagnose misinformation and disinformation. We need to be able to have difficult conversations with our AI tools and say, like, this is inaccurate. Where are you getting this information from? Can you share the resources and the sources with me? And then you go and do the due diligence behind those sources. You have to really be intentional when you're using AI. You cannot take the lazy way out and just assume that the answer it's putting out there is the right answer. AI, you have to remember, has been developed and is being developed by humans. And humans make mistakes all of the time. It works quick, it moves quick, it does everything really quickly. So we become quite complacent because it does a couple of things quite nicely and quite well and think, oh, this is amazing. Yeah, I'm going to just carry on. But I would say 50%, even probably higher, it's inaccurate. So if you want to build your critical thinking, you need to be able to question in the right way. You need to be able to develop your prompts in the right way. And most importantly, you need to be able to step away and reflect on what it's telling you and do your due diligence properly to make sure that you're not inadvertently spreading misinformation or incorrect data or insights. So you have to ask the questions just as you would ask anybody, really, like, where did you get this research from? Can you give me the source of this research? How long has this research existed for? Can you give me the source of the data? And make sure that you look into it. That's how you're going to build your critical thinking. And you have to be, I would always err on the side of caution with AI. Take some steps to put in either a checklist to slow down your thinking a bit, or ask it to ask you questions as well. You can do those kind of things with AI. Share the information that you have gathered from AI with somebody else for them to sense check it for you. So have an accountability buddy, a human accountability buddy. All of these things will help your critical thinking improve. Critical thinking is dying out because we're just taking everything at face value and we're not asking the right questions. So be mindful, put the checklist together, have it on a screen, put it on a post-it, whatever you need. Make sure that your AI agent does that for you as well. But even then, make sure you're taking it offline and sense checking it yourself or sense checking it with somebody else. That's the way I would build critical thinking. And this is obvious, but just take yourself offline for a while and go and read something that's not on the computer and learn how to do research like you used to do in the, like in the good old days, which makes me sound like I'm 150 years old. But there is something in taking that time out and looking at papers rather than just on a screen and just taking whatever AI tells us as gospel. It really isn't. Like I said, more often than not, I would say some of the information is incorrect. Well, I hope that helped. I hope it made up for all those tech glitches I had when we went live. Like I said, if you have any questions, if you disagreed with anything I've shared, please do say. I love a good debate. I think it's really important we have this. It's really boring when everyone just agrees with the same thing. I think it's important that we have our own thoughts and thinking. So if you have disagreed with anything that I've shared, or you haven't quite understood what I'm trying to say, then please do message me. Like I said, you can message me on LinkedIn directly, just DM me. Absolutely okay. My DMs are always open. Or feel free to go through the wonderful team at Oak Engage, and I'm sure they'll get the questions back to me. Thank you so much for giving me your time. Please stay safe, take care of yourself, make sure that you're taking plenty of breaks and having the rest that you deserve. See you soon.